Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart and it's time for another painting video for Warlord Games Epic Battles Hail Caesar the Punic Wars. I have to admit, out of all the frames that Warlord Games very kindly sent me ahead of release, the Gallic Celts are probably the ones that interest me the most. In a recent article on their community site, they mentioned that they have plans to expand them in the future, and that's part of the reason why they were on a separate frame for everything else. I quite like the idea of maybe doing a small force of these in the future. And so the aim of this video is to test out a paint scheme that I've designed to do them relatively quickly and look relatively similar to the studio paint scheme, at least in terms of colours anyway, definitely not in skill. So no, I'm not going to paint all of these stands for this video. I'm going to be focusing on one, but I wanted to come up with a method, a scheme that I could paint these in bulk. So I've got them all prepared and I've started to work on the rest behind the scenes. So these are two thin coats, barbarian brawn, dwarven skin and elven skins were a nice little skin triad, and the idea behind this method is to, instead of zenithal with white, to actually build up the flesh tones. Now the flesh is probably about a third of each miniature, maybe even less, maybe 25%, so it's not the most predominant colour, but by building up the flesh like this, I'm also giving myself a pretty nice base in order to paint the rest of the colours. So I'm working up all three colours you saw on that little triad there. You don't have to use those. Any three skin tones that match that you may have in your collection will do a similar job. So I'm maintaining the top-down kind of approach, letting a little bit of that black still maintain in the shadows, the same way as I would with a zenithal underpainting, but working from the top down here, leaving some of the original skin tone as well, and just adding a little bit of the lighter touch each time. As we get on that final layer, I'm being very light here, focusing just where the light would hit towards the top of the miniature. Once that's all done, I'm heading to dwarf skin and some medium, a 50-50 mix to thin it right down. And I'm actually applying this over those flesh areas. So I'm layering it to run into all the recesses. This is quite a thin contrast style paint. That's why I've gone for the dwarf skin. If you want to use a citadel version, the Guilliman flesh would be the closest, and you definitely want to thin it down. I want to slightly tint the top areas, but mainly run into the recesses just to really pick out that detail. But the plan is this will be it for the skin. I don't want to have to go back and do different highlighting, especially if you've got a massed army with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these Celts. You want a quick method that looks good but it isn't going to drive you mad. You see, when we head round to the back of the miniatures, that thin mix I've made runs really nicely into all the musculature of the arm and the back there, but still maintaining that lighter area at the top, so you've got those highlights built in. Now it's time to add in some colours, so I've got some contrast Alcyon in blue, some Blood Angels red, I have some Magos purple, I have some Mantis Warrior green, and I have some Garagax sewer. Now I don't normally paint like this with all these pots open, but I want to illustrate the kind of method I'm doing here. If I was painting a large batch of these, I'd just do the red across 5 or 6 stands, but I'm working on a single stand, so I've got all the pots open. And I'm just looking at the Warlord Games Studio paint job for a reference guide in terms of the kind of colour choices and the kind of placement. I'm just working my way along the miniatures, applying a nice base coat of these contrast paints. And because we've painted this lovely light flesh colour all over the miniatures, it takes the paint pretty well. Not quite as bright as it would be if you'd done it in white or a light grey and then dry brushed it like I've done on a lot of my other videos, but it's still a really nice way of getting a base coat down. So nearly all the rules and methods that I use with my contrast base coating style that I use on so many of my tutorials remain here. Trying to be neat, trying not to get it over into areas where you don't want it, because you want to use that underpainting, which in this case is a slightly flesh tone but still works in underpainting. You want to keep that as clean as possible so that when you apply these base coat layers in these contrast style paints, you get a nice clean finish with a bit of highlight showing through. I've actually used the Garagax sewer on all of their sort of leather boots and things as well, and I'm also covering over the bit of the pudding base along the bottom. That's all going to be hidden by basing texture anyway, but it means there'll be less chance of something light poking through if there is a slight gap. I continue with those colour choices on the back for their capes as well. The Magos purple is a very light tone here, but there were a few sort of reddishy purpley tones in the examples for the Studio Paint scheme. And again, I want to find a method to paint these relatively quickly. And this goes quite nicely over that flesh tone, makes the cape look a little bit faded, goes into the recesses. And I may not do any highlighting at all on this. And of course, you don't have to use the contrast paints. You could use the Express colour range. You could use the Army Painter Speed paint range. Just look at the paint colours that are on the reference books that you may have, or on the Warlord Games own studio paint scheme like I'm using, and choose your colours and work with them there. This is really just giving you an idea how you may approach this. Now turning to some of the same colours again, so the same Arasurman blue, some Orc flesh this time, slightly darker green, Blood Angels red, and Nazdrag yellow. And the goal here is to paint on some shield design. Again, I'm using the studio scheme as a bit of a reference. I'm definitely not going to be painting any checker that's on there, not on these miniatures. I might add them to a character or something like that, or at least not for now. It might be something I go back in the future, but I'm still using them for the colour choices and the basic placements. We're looking at quartered patterns, halved patterns, that kind of thing. So I continue to work my way along, picking out the different colours, choosing my designs. It could be fairly random, but you don't want too many of the same colour right next to each other. You want it to break up and give it that variation. It's the same whether you're using the blues or the greens. You just want to follow similar kinds of patterns. And again, if you want some inspiration, I'm sure there are loads of fantastic history books out there. Some of them are full colour shields, like the one I'm working on at the moment. Some will be half like the green I'm working on there, and there will be some white as well. I'm just going to be leaving those in that light flesh colour for now, but that will be a perfect base to work from to highlight up to white later on. A few finishing touches and tidy ups, and before we know it, we are done with the base colour for all of the shields. Now we have Gore Grunt of Fur and Nazdrag Yellow from the Citadel colour range, the more contrast paints, and I'm just using these for the hair, being very stereotypical here. We're doing ginger and blondes, and again taking the reference from the studio paint scheme, but these just stand out nicely and a little bit caricature, but that's what I want my Celts to look like. Now I'm turning to contrast Cygor Brown, which is a nice deep rich brown with reddish undertones, and this is going to do quite a lot of heavy lifting here. Not only is it going to be the wood for all of the spear shafts and things like that, it's going to be the belts, which there's a little bit showing at the back on some miniatures, but I'm also going to paint it in anywhere there's going to be metallic, so I'm giving myself a dark base to work from. One of the main reasons for doing this is if there are any gaps when you place your metallic paint down, there won't be any lighter colour showing through. But I also find on miniatures like these, where they are cast or sculpted in one strip, there's always this kind of negative space where the thickness of the shield looks a bit longer or something like that. So you need a kind of dark neutral colour just to fill those parts, because you don't want to paint everything. So if the rim on the shield is going to be metallic bronze or something like that, but it's nearly ½ centimetre thick, you might want to leave it a little bit thinner and just leave some of that dark brown in the recess. Now for the first metallic, and this is black metal from Scale Colour. I'm just picking out all of the sword blades and then all of the spear tips. I'm also going to pick out the helmets in this colour as well. Now in the studio scheme there's a mixture of sort of bronze and silver helmets. I think on this strip I just used the silvery colour for all of them. And then the same metallics range, this is Viking gold, which is kind of a brassy, orangey gold. I'm using this for all of the gold or brass areas on the miniatures. So we're mostly looking at the bosses on the shields, but we have this rim around the edge of the shields as well. We also have the hilts of the handles on these swords. Game Air Silver is the perfect little highlight for the black metal, so just a little touch here and there where the light would catch along the tops of the swords and the tips of those spears, and a little bit on the tops of the helmets. And then the same job, I'm using Elven Gold here for the gold areas, which probably aren't gold, they're going to be brass, but I find this is a desaturated enough colour just to add a little highlight and will make your eye think that it's a bronzish colour, even though essentially we're painting in a gold. There's quite a few little areas to pick out, so obviously we have all those hilts and things on the bosses, but we've also got that edging we put around the tops of the shields. And I'm being quite limited here. I don't want it to look too shiny. I'm not sure how bright it would be or even how metallic it would be, but it looks like a brass in the studio paint scheme, so I'm just doing a very, very subtle highlight just to the very tops, just to really make it pop. And before you know it, you have a very, very gameable piece, and many people will choose to jump off here, and it's a really nice, easy way of doing it, which saves a lot of time painting in the skin, which you'd have to do on a normal method. But we are going to move along. We have got to highlight some of these colours. Well, we haven't got to, but my plan is to make the strip pop by focusing on the colours which draw the eye. So I've grabbed a lot of two thin coats, triads, and I might not use the whole triad. You don't have to use those. You could use other colours like the Avalanche Sunton and a Phalanx Yellow for highlighting the yellows. You may have seen other videos. I'm going to mostly focus on these two thin coats range. I like the inbuilt triad straight away. I'll put a little dot of all three paints, so you could use these blues if you wanted. Just giving you some ideas. This video is very much about finding yourself a base coat and then something you can add a little bit of a highlight to make it pop. There's a nice green triad I'm going to use for the green areas on the shields. And again, here's a red one. If you don't have the two thin coats paints, you can use these two. Again, you'll be familiar with those if you watch my Napoleonic tutorials. And this is exactly what I'm doing here. Is just adding a little bit of the mid-tone red in this case to highlight. I've put the base, the mid and the high tone from that triad on my palette. The idea is I'll just focus on the mid and high, but if I went a little bit too far, I've got that base color just to add a little bit of darkness back again. I didn't need to use it in this instance. Continue that method round to these shields at the front, so you're adding in the mid-tone and then just reinforcing that highlight afterwards. I just want this to really pop and stand out, but without spending too much time on the detail, and that's why I'm focusing on the colour parts, because that really is what draws your eye. Same when we got to the blue. I'm just using the mid and the highlight tone for these miniatures. Now I will try, if I have time, to put a list of all the paints I did use in the video description. I don't always have time to do that, so you may want to pause the video and take some notes when they're on the screen if you want to copy this exactly. But this tutorial is very much aimed at giving you an idea of how you may achieve a nice looking strip without painting too much detail in or taking too much time. So a lot of people here might just want to do one quick highlight across the shields to really make it pop and nothing else. It's up to you how far you go. You can see here I've gone all the way to the top highlight in the blue, and I'm just painting in a very thin line around the edge. I'm comfortable doing this. It doesn't take too long, but I know it won't be for everyone. So I'm using the same general colour palette for the clothing and the cloaks and things as I was for the shields. So while those paints are on my palette, I can go around and add a little bit of a highlight here and there to certain areas of clothing. I didn't highlight everything, didn't highlight all the greens and the purples, but just made the blue and the red pop a little bit more, which again will draw the eye. The eagle-eyed of you will notice that both strips are now stuck to the base and they weren't for that initial stage. Again, that's a time-saving thing. I used to spend a lot of time highlighting both strips, front and back, and then you stick them together and you can't see it. So while I have highlighted the backs of the front rank a little bit, mainly just over their shoulders, definitely not down by their feet where you just can't see it. By the time I got to the green, I found only the base tone was really needed as well, because it was so much lighter than the contrast paint I used. So I just added a little bit to the top corner and feathered it out with a bit of water, and that was done. For the yellows, on the other hand, I used the whole triad, working my way up through all three colours. Two thin coats range are very, very good yellows. Not quite as clean coverage as some of the Citadel ones, but you've got a little bit more control with them as well, and they layer extremely well. So with all those bright colours added, it's time to turn to flat earth, and I don't use this much at all. There's a couple of sets of brown trousers on the miniatures, so I'm just adding a tiniest little highlight to make those stand out a little more. And now for some hull red, and I'm going to be using this to highlight all of those areas of Sigil brown that we haven't covered in metallic paint. So we're looking at those spear shafts mostly, but also the odd little belt and things around the back if you wish. Sticking with model colour, we have Iraqi sand and white grey. Starting with the Iraqi sand, I'm just going around anywhere I think it should be a white or creamish colour. So there's quite a few little bits of clothing which would be that colour. I'm just doing very subtle line highlights there. You're almost going over that light flesh tone, which now looks beige in the context of everything else. This is exactly what I wanted and what I hoped. So a few little highlights here just to make it pop. On the fronts of the shields itself, I'm giving a little bit of a fuller coat of the Iraqi sand first. That light skin tone is a really nice base for it, so it covers no problems at all. Then after that we can go in with the white grey and add a nice highlight. And that really starts to make them pop.
Now, very much optional extras now. This is Skulker Yellow. I decided just to give a couple of the blonde guy's hair a little bit of a lift on that front rank. And if you want to do the same for the redhead guys, we have a Rust Orange. So for the other epic ranges I was using a basing paste. This time I've just been using this Geek Gaming Scenics ready mix stuff that's designed for smaller miniatures. I don't know the name because I was sent them unbranded for review at the time, but if you check their website you should be able to see quite a few. But it's a nice mix of flock and sand, and as you can see with a bit of PVA it fills it very nicely. I have added a couple of tufts as well. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it useful. I tried to make it slightly different from the usual formulaic, paint this colour here, paint this colour there. I wanted to give you an idea of the kind of method I was trying to build using that airbrush, I'm afraid, to do the skin tone to start with. If you don't have an airbrush, you could absolutely buy a flesh coloured spray and still do the rest of the tutorial, and I believe it will work quite nicely. But I think this saved me lots of time. Not only did I get the flesh down really easily, really quickly, which meant I didn't need to go in with a small brush afterwards to do it, it also gave me a nice enough base to paint the rest of the colour and get it on quite quickly. And then really focusing on making sure the metallics pop and stand out, and then those fronts of the shields pop and stand out. And before you know it, you've got quite a striking stand of miniatures at a kind of painting time that I think if I have to paint, 30 of them or something like that for a big mass army, it's something I think I can cope with. But let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already checked out the other epic tutorials on the channel before, there are lots for all of the ranges that Warlord Games have done. There's also a lot of other games on the channel as well. So if you are new to the channel, do go and check them out. If you're not new to the channel, you've been around for a while, thank you very much for your continued support. I have a pike and shot epic based video on the way soon, and with that video I will announce the winner of the competition I launched for the full pike and shot starter set, so you'll have to keep an eye on the channel for that. And I've got no doubt I'll be returning to more Epic Battles Hail Caesar content very soon as well. If you'd like to support the channel, the best way to do that is by subscribing, giving this video a like, sharing it, that kind of thing. But if you'd like to go a little bit further, I do have a Patreon, which there are a number of levels right through from the most basic £1, just a bit of a nod and a thank you, and also all the way up to getting painting tuition and coaching and things as well, if that suits you. That is done online at this stage. The channel has a very friendly Discord you can join as well. Links to all those things are available in the video description. And I also have an affiliate link for Warlord Games. If you're thinking about ordering any of these Warlord Games products and you click via that link, it doesn't cost you any more, but it gives me a little bit of a kickback and a little bit of extra support. But thank you very much. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.